The upcoming election will determine what kind of democracy we have, if we have one at all, because elections have consequences. Just look at the Supreme Court, which is turning back American democracy one ruling at a time. Today, the Republican-delivered conservative majority feasted on yet another one of their favorite targets, the drawing of congressional lines based on power, not representation. At issue is the congressional map drawn in Alabama. 5 weeks from now, voters in that state will vote in 8 congressional districts, 7 of which are majority white and Republican. Just one was set aside as a majority black district. Months ago, a 3-judge federal court panel, including 2 Trump appointees, ruled that Alabama's map diminished the influence of black voters by concentrating their voting power into a single House district, even though the state's population is 27% black. That would have meant the state had to redraw their maps to include not 1, but 2 black majority districts. But in February, the state made an emergency plea to block the lower court's ruling. Not surprisingly, the 5 ultra-conservatives in the majority, including Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, all agreed that the court should revisit this. Shockingly, Chief Justice John Roberts did not. Alabama argued that drawing a second district for black voters would itself be racially discriminatory because it would favor black voters at the expense of other voters. The 3 liberal justices pressed the Alabama Solicitor General on why they should upend 40 years of precedent to rule that it's basically okay to gerrymander a district against predominantly black communities.
What strikes me about this case is that under our precedent, it's kind of a slam dunk. You're asking us essentially to cut back substantially on our 40 years of precedent and to make this, too, extremely difficult to prevail on. So what's left?
And on all the factors the district court looked at, it concluded that the Black Belt community, which is a community of interest, was inappropriately cracked.
Your Honor,
in 3 or 4 districts. Why isn't that actionable?
Can you sustain your hypothesis that under traditional redistricting principles, we can have a map that is drawn the way we ordinarily draw maps and has a majority of minorities?
The conservative justices were way more conciliatory and sure did sound eager to rule in Alabama's favor, finally delivering the death knell to a Voting Rights Act, which they've methodically eviscerated in the face of what feels like insurmountable forces. But in face of those seemingly insurmountable forces across the country, people are fighting back. Tonight, we are bringing back the democracy defenders, people, groups, community organizers, and students who are fighting against what do seem like insurmountable challenges. One of those individuals is Eric Holder, who has, since he left office as Attorney General of the United States, made it his mission, literally, to protect our democracy and to execute a redistricting strategy that helps rebalance power with the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Even wrote a playbook for it on how we can save our democracy called Our Unfinished March, the Violent Past and Imperiled Future of the Vote, a history, a crisis, a plan. And Attorney General Eric Holder joins me now. And Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being here. I only listened to snippets of it and followed on social media as folks like Sherilyn Ifill and Elie Mystal were live tweeting what was going on inside of the Supreme Court. But it was very disheartening because it felt like the liberal justices, including the new Justice Jackson, were making very coherent points that the point of the 14th Amendment was to literally protect the formerly enslaved. And it seemed like the same normal 5 and maybe 6, they just want to kill the Voting Rights Act. Is that the way you see it?
Well, it's hard to tell at this point, but I do think that Justice Kagan had it exactly right. This is a slam dunk. I mean, this is not, this should not be a difficult case to resolve. This is a classic Section 2 violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. The political power of African Americans in Alabama was diluted, unconstitutionally, statutorily, inappropriately diluted. There should be 2 African American opportunity districts in Alabama. And you cite in those statistics that you said, 27% of the eligible voters, only 14% when it comes down to the representation. There are sufficiently a sufficient number of African Americans who are geographically compact. It would not be hard at all to draw 2 normal looking districts that would give African Americans the opportunity to vote for the candidate of their choice, presumably, but not without any doubt, presumably another African-American congressman from the state of Alabama.
You know, and obviously this was deliberately done. The former slave states very deliberately embarked on a decades-long crusade after Reconstruction collapsed to lock out their formerly enslaved populations from the vote. It's very clear. I mean, Mississippi has even a higher black population. It's like a third African-American, but you never know it. They got the one congressman, Benny Thompson, and they've got like 4 members in their state house. Just five out of 44. I don't know. It feels like it's locked in now because you don't have a Supreme Court that even believes in the Voting Rights Act. John Roberts, who's the mildest of the 6, has been a crusader against the Voting Rights Act since he was a lawyer in the Reagan administration. Even he doesn't believe it should exist. And Clarence Thomas and Alito and the rest seem eager to kill it. Are we looking at the death of the Voting Rights Act completely, and what will that mean?
Well, they certainly have, hurt the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County case, where they essentially took away pre-clearance from the Justice Department. Section 2 is one of the remaining components that is still a very vital part of the act. And so that is certainly the fear that I have. My hope will be that they will look at precedent, look at principle, and decide the case in the appropriate way. But here's something that I think the justices on the court need to consider. We've been talking a lot over the last couple of weeks about the legitimacy of the court. At some point, when they do things that are totally inconsistent with precedent, totally inconsistent with the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, since 1965, every time it was signed back into law by a Republican president, when they do those kinds of things, it makes the American people question. Are we dealing with judges who are deciding things in a neutral way, or are they ideological in the way in which they are interpreting the law? My concern is that they're going to be ideological. My hope is that they will, follow precedent, follow the facts, apply the law in the neutral way that they should. And if they do that, we will end up with what the Alabama legislature tried to do, being held as violating the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And one thing I think is really important here, this notion that somehow these things should be race blind. Well, the Alabama Republican legislature did not do things in a race-blind way. They cracked the districts there in such a way that they deprived African Americans of their full electoral rights. And so people should not think that this was, Republicans happened to just do this and it just happened to show up that way. They did this in a very conscious way to make sure that African Americans did not get the representation to which they are entitled.
And we know that this is not just in the South. I mean, in Ohio, voters are going to vote this year on a map that their own state constitution said is unconstitutional, and they're still getting to vote on it. What can people do proactively with just 4 or 5 weeks left? What can we do? Yeah, go ahead.
That's an extremely important point. And I'll get to your point, but this is not a Southern thing now. What we're seeing in Ohio, we're seeing in Wisconsin, what we're seeing throughout the country are Republican legislatures ignoring their own Supreme Courts, doing things totally inconsistent with both their state constitutions and federal statutes. And so the fight is not only in the Old South, this is a nationwide fight. And so between now and then, I think Americans all around the country have to really get out there and vote like they have never voted before. Understand that state legislative races really matter. And we should not be only focused on federal, who's running for president, who's running for governor. Who controls these state legislatures is really, really important. And so vote up and down the ballot for candidates who will be democracy defenders.
It is not Sunday, but you can get an amen on that. Vote all the way up and down that ballot. State representatives, and they really, really do matter. Thank you very much. Former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, thank you.